Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Planning Committee meeting today. As there are no additional health and safety measures that we need to be made aware of, let's move straight to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. The first item, we have received any in advance?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor William Armitage, who's substituted by Councillor Pat Ancliffe, Councillor Mark Foster, who's substituted by Councillor Steve Clough, and Councillor Roger Hall, who's not substituted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't think there are anybody else missing?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. The second item is the declaration of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and or other interests not already on their register of interests in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Do any members have any interests to declare?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Oh, I've lost a page. Do bear with me. Yep, there you go. Okay. Minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday, the 18th of January, 2022. Are we happy that they are a correct record?
Move it, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? The motion's been carried. Thank you. This brings us to the main business of the meeting. We have 5 substantial items, each with its own report. I am happy with this and intend to consider them in that order. The meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube. However, the stream will end when we consider the 2 exempt reports. If any public are still in the room at that point, they will also be asked to leave. Before we begin, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers, and those watching on YouTube how we will deal with the application.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications this afternoon. We will consider the 2 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website and hard copies have been circulated to you. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. After this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, ward members, objectors, supporters, then the applicant or their agent to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all of the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee and determination by a vote. The votes will be taken by roll call. Once the application which a speaker has come to speak on has been dealt with, they may leave the chamber or the Zoom meeting room. If they choose to remain, then they will not be allowed to participate further from that point. Now, as you are aware, this meeting is being live streamed and recording will be placed on the Council's website. Please note that others may choose to copy it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The first application is item 4, which is NED/21/0/12116 TPO Clay Cross. In line with our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning manager and officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. I will allow the officers to complete the presentation. Consequently, members, could you please reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end? There will be plenty of time for questions. Thank you. I'm now going to invite the first officer
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just in terms of this application, as you've outlined, the application is to undertake works to various trees covered by North East Derbyshire District Council Tree Preservation Order 276 at Clay Cross. And further to the discussion at planning site visits yesterday, Chair, the application site comprises trees roughly within the area at the centre of the slide here, and the remainder of the site to the east is the area that's currently being developed for housing further to the grant of planning consent. The proposals, Chair, relate to the removal of 2 trees. These are the 2 outlined in red. Some works to the 5 trees outlined in yellow, and then some more general works to raise the crown of the trees within the 2 areas hatched in orange, just those 2 areas. I'm holding up the cursor, Chair. As I say, the area to the east is the area that's been granted planning consent for residential development. Just very briefly, Chair, site visits yesterday, members did see photos of the trees, but just a brief reminder that 2 trees are relating to the installation of some drainage works, and this is one of those trees, Chair, and the others that we saw on the site visits yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian, I've just got one quick question before I open the floor. I was sent an email with some photographs yesterday. Do we have these on site?
There are some photographs, Chair, that relate to the application representations made to those. They were sent out in the late representation yesterday. There has been various other correspondence that has been submitted more in relation to the general nature of the development of the site, Chair, and concerns over the weekend further to the heavy rainfall. So the late reps yesterday specifically refers to the comments we've had about the trees and the application before you this afternoon.
Thank you. So we've not received any footage of photographs or video?
Yes, there have been footage of, as I say, the brook further to the heavy rainfall over the last few days, and comments in relation to wider flooding issues, Chair, but nothing, as far as I've read it, in relation to this application, other than to that information that's in the late representations that were sent out yesterday.
Thank you, Adrian. I believe we have some speakers for this application, and the first speaker, I believe, is Councillor Ross Shipman, who's requested to speak as a member who has submitted the original call-in. Councillor Shipman, 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite disappointed to Adrian that I don't think the video you've just referred to, Chair, and the images that were sent out are not in relation to this application, given the fact that in the pictures where it's flooded, as we saw on Sunday, some of these very trees that are being considered during this debate are actually in them. The trees act as a natural flood defence for that brook, and they were, as far as I believe and understand, they were actually put in for that purpose to help as a natural flood defence for the brook. So I think the video, which I've got on, and if you've been sent it, you should have it on your own iPod to look at yourself, is relevant. And I think by passing this and removing more trees from the side of that brook is going to be a disaster. I think if you look at the photos, and especially the video, where you see how high the water is, you see it's a real problem. And if the other side of the brook had not been raised already, the other side of the brook would have been flooded at the weekend. But because of that they've raised it, you can't tell from these pictures, but you can from the older pictures during the first time it was discussed. And I'm honestly really surprised that, like I say, Adrian or any of the other planning officers have not brought it to your attention, because I think it's very relevant. And in the Constitution, under the protocols of planning, I think it's 9.2, any new information that's brought to light should be given its fair time to be discussed at this meeting. So I'm concerned, actually, that there's a planning officer saying it's not relevant, when clearly, as you've just highlighted, you felt it was relevant to even raise it at this meeting. And I think that planning officers either need to get these photos and this video up on screen, or it's deferred until every single person that sat around this committee can actually look at it and look at what you're voting for. because there was flooded. The Pressbrook nearly broke its banks on Sunday. It was that high. And I believe that every single committee member needs to actually look at those pictures and the footage in order to make an informed decision today. Thank you. Yep.
Before you leave, were any properties actually flooded?
They weren't, but like I said, the level, actually, if you looked at the level of where it got to, it was high. It was higher than the natural level that was on the other side of the brook. But luckily, it didn't break its bank on Sunday, but it was very close.
Yeah,
Probably the highest it's been in years, actually.
I think considering the adverse weather we've had over the last few days, I think anyone near a brook, stream or river had more than adequate concerns, but thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Shipman?
I have a question. If I'm allowed, I'm another speaker, John Kirk.
No, you're not allowed.
You're not. No.
All right, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shipman.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is an objector, Mr. Richard Eden.
Thank you, Chair.
3 minutes when you're ready.
Just like to make you aware, yeah, obviously on Sunday we did have concerns. We had to ring emergency services out because we've got a vulnerable persons on Windermere Road, what a bedbound downstairs. Our electric meters are under the stairs, so if any water comes into that house, there's risk of electrocution. I'd just like to state that Adrian said that the trees in the red, they have already been moved 2 weeks ago. The developer did move them with an excavator, which was not up to legislation. They were supposed to be moving them by hand because of the otters and the water voles. We have got video footage of that. The previous damaged trees, they was done by the developer, and it was only down to the residents challenging them and enforcement, getting in touch with enforcement, that they was stopped from removing them. And that's why the original TPO was put on. These trees, what they're on about, are within the 10-metre buffer zone. I feel they just wanted to trim the trees to try and claim some more of the buffer zone, which is going to affect the wildlife, which they've already affected with removing all the trees in the orchard. But these trees were put there for a reason, to secure that bank side and also absorb water. If you allow them to prune these, they're not going to absorb as much water, and it's going to put us at further flood risk, which we already have been put at with raising of the land. We've got many concerns. I keep coming to these meetings and I just feel like I'm banging my head against the wall, but we were the closest we've ever been to flooding on Sunday. I know there was adverse weather conditions, but water was not allowed to go into that floodplain because that land's been raised, and it increased the depth of that brook. It's only a matter of time that we flood, and this is down to that development. I'm hoping that you'll all get together today and not agree to these trees being pruned back. The developer said they'd enhance the orchard, which they didn't. They've removed every single tree in that orchard. There is not one fruit tree left in that orchard. And you've seen there's some wind damage to the trees over the last previous days, and that's because they're out in the open now because they've got no protection because they've removed every other tree that there is on that land. They also haven't put the otter mitigation fencing in like they stated it should have been in before construction started. So they're saying they need to put a fence in, but they've already got Harris fencing in, so they don't need to trim the trees because they can get Harris fencing in, so they can get fencing in. They just want to take a bit more land, I think. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. You'd like to stay where you are just in case there's any questions. Have we got any questions for the speaker? Councillor Hancock?
Thank you, Chair. Just one, Mr. Eden. I just want to clarify that I heard you correctly. Did you say these two trees have already been removed?
Oh, yeah, the red ones, yes. Thank you. They've moved them with an excavator, and they should have done it. If they was allowed to move them, legislation stated by wildlife that any work on that bank had to be done by hand tools because of the otters and the water voles, and they have done it by an excavator.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. And the third speaker, Mr. John Kirk, he's a supporter and he's speaking by Zoom.
Hello, yeah.
Hello, 3 minutes when you're ready.
Firstly, I'm supporting the application because it appears that apart from the drainage, the trees were being removed or have been removed for the drainage. the application was obviously approved, and as part of that is the drainage, obviously a very, very important part. And in my experience, having installed attenuation tanks and drainage systems that are being installed on site, I think the actual flood risk will lessen. And I think Severn Trent's report backed that up. Mainly for the reasons is that field has always drained directly into the river, and now the floodwater is going to contain into the attenuation tanks and drain in slowly. So I think the flood risk, personally, downstream, if there was going to be an extra element of flood risk, would be the case. However, for the estate and for the trees, I disagree. I live on the same road. I live on Windermere Road. And the water was very high. However, I've seen it quite a bit higher than it was this weekend. Even though we've had terrible weather, like I say, I'm not saying it wasn't right. The water rises very, very quickly and drains away very quickly. And I think if there was concerns, and people that have concerns, if they actually remove trees from the river, further down the river, it'd help the flow of water. So I don't think personally, I think flooding, the risk of flooding is going to get better whether they trim the trees or not. And my second point is, when the TPO was, in my opinion, hastily put on these trees, was the condition of the trees checked sufficiently, just in light of recent winds? I mean, there's no leaves on the trees, and you've got a decent sized branch that is probably going to fall on someone's garden once these houses are built, causing risk to health or property. And you've got some larger trees there that are basically growing at a near 45-degree angle towards the new houses. So I don't actually think they're going far enough. I think there's going to be more requests to trim trees. And I think if you do not let the contractor trim trees, you're not letting them comply with the CDM regulations, which is to remove any foreseeable risk. And if you can't see from recent days that them trees are causing foreseeable risk to them properties and people, then I think you need to revisit the site. I think there needs to be more trimming of trees, and I think there should be planting of semi-mature and different species of trees along that bank to make sure the bank's stable. However, I don't think the trees concerned are in a very good condition, and I think they should be trimmed more.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And our final speaker is Darren Abbott, the applicant. Are you with us, Mr. Abbott?
Yes, I think so.
3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. My name is Darren Abbott, recently appointed Planning Director at Woodall Homes, who are the applicant seeking approval for the proposed tree management works. As detailed in the Office of Presentation, planning permission was granted for residential development of this site, and the details are supported by an arboricultural assessment, which forms an approved document listed on the decision notice. Many of the trees along the western boundary lean heavily into the site and have low crowns, such that facilitating works were envisaged from the onset and referenced in the approved arboricultural assessment. This document details access facilitation pruning, which essentially covers instances where wide or tall plant operates within close proximity to the trees and allows for limited surgery to prevent damage. Whilst this document is approved, such works are yet to be undertaken to date, given the imposition of the tree preservation order. It's clear that these works are required to enable the development to proceed, and remedial work undertaken such that formal approval is sought. Further, details were approved last year of a knot mitigation strategy required by condition of the planning permission, proposing installation of fencing to protect and segregate the wild buffer from the development site. Again, given the imposition of the tree preservation order, these works could not be implemented approved arboricultural assessment. A comprehensive landscaping scheme, along with associated management and maintenance, is approved for the site, and this includes planting of existing gaps along the brook. I note that no objections have been received by the Council's tree warden or parks officer, and with reference to the trees that have already been removed, this was with specific consent from the Council their removal, and hence they have only been removed with the consent from the council ahead of this meeting. I would welcome your support in backing your officer recommendation to allow these management works to proceed, given that the submission of this application was in October last year. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. I read in 5.2 about the otter fencing. Can you tell me whether that's been put in before you've started with your?
Yes, there's
Why not?
there's security fencing up at the moment.
No, I said otter fencing, sir.
Yeah, there's security fencing up at the moment, but we haven't been able to get the otter-proof fencing in because we're required to crown lift the trees. But we can't crown lift the trees until we have consent formally from the council, given the imposition of the tree preservation order. It was originally envisaged that we'd need to do that work within the arboricultural assessment, but given that there's an order in place, we need formal approval from the council to be able to carry out those works.
Was that not stated in the original report, arboricultural report?
Yes, yes, it was.
About putting in the otter fencing. I'm not talking about crowning the trees. Trees have been there a long time.
Yeah, the otter-proof fencing is in the otter mitigation strategy, which is an approved document approved by condition in October last year.
And is the condition, did we not state the condition was to put that in before you started development of the site?
That is it's a regulatory point on that planning condition, but we can't get it in without crown lifting those trees because of the tree preservation order.
Can you tell me the height of the otter fencing?
It is not specified in the mitigation strategy, but it talks about a Harris fencing with a gravel board at the bottom temporarily, coupled thereafter with a gravel board and a permanent fence moving forward once development is completed.
So if you can educate me, the Harris fencing, has that needed posts putting in?
They are temporary posts at the moment with the security fencing in place, and there is a mesh there. But in order to ensure that it is fit for purpose, we need to crown lift those trees.
So the temporary posts and the temporary fencing have been put in without crown lifting, but you can't put the otter fence in before you crown lift. Is that right?
That's correct.
If that's the case, can you tell me exactly why?
We simply can't get to the place where we need to put the otter-proof fence in order to segregate the development site from the wildlife buffer.
And if you could just tell me also, in the original application, although now you're talking about removing trees, on the original application, did it actually state anywhere that you're going to start putting more in?
It's in
every one you remove, are you putting more back?
It's in the landscaping strategy. Yes, we're filling in existing gaps, and we're also got an approved landscaping scheme for the orchard that was referenced to.
The orchard that should have stayed there.
No, none of the orchard has been removed that isn't shown for removal. It's all in the approved landscaping scheme that the council has agreed to.
Well, I think I've sat through a couple of these meetings on this project, on this development, and it's been stated on more than a couple of occasions that the orchard had been removed. Can you tell me that everything I've heard is wrong then? So the orchard wasn't removed?
I'm not aware of the orchard being removed to the extent that it doesn't conform with the landscaping scheme that has been agreed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Hancock, then Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just actually trying to clarify on the bit that Councillor Elliott was, I think, trying to get you to expand on, which you didn't really. Given that the height of this fencing was never stated previously, then there clearly hasn't been a defined need for these trees for the crowns to be raised. So I think the point is, why are you not actually going with a height of fencing that doesn't need work on these trees?
Well, the height of the fencing for the permanent structures is 1.8 to 2 metres in height. So the boundary enclosures to the plots. So those will require crown lifting, which is, as I say, set out in the approved arboricultural assessment. There is temporary fencing in at the moment, but to ensure that it is to a greater extent fit for purpose, we need to crown lift those trees as has been set out by our arboricultural consultant.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still not clear on why, because it's not making sense. If you've got one fence there that's pretty much the same height and the pole, why do they need to be crowned to get the same height of fencing there?
Well, these will be permanent structures once the enclosures are a place within where the garden areas will be for these plots, as opposed to the temporary fencing that's in place at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm being really thick or you're just not, because one fence is another one. That if you're not needing to remove it for one, I really don't see why you're needing to read it to the other. You're not getting across to me why there's such a need for that to happen.
Because those will be permanent structures that will be put in place along the boundary of those properties and along the site edge, rather than temporary fencing that is being put in place at the moment. So the temporary fencing is not physically attached to the ground.
Councillor Liggett.
Well, unfortunately, I was going to ask the same question. I was going to ask what the physical difference is. What, if you can explain to us exactly how this fencing is going to be put in and why it's different to the Harris fencing.
It would need machinery to be put in to go into those areas within beneath the crowns of the trees.
I think we've all put fencing in at home without machinery.
Well, that's
lots of people have put fencing against other people's boundaries, and they've only been allowed to put fencing in from one side. They've not had access to the other side. That's what I just can't physically get my head around it.
The equipment is required to install those fencing. That is the information that is before us, and that's the advice that we've had from our arboricultural consultant. To prevent damage to those trees, we need to crown lift those along that boundary to enable to get the fencing in place, rather than the temporary security fencing that's there at the moment.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. We're talking about the trees that have gone, and I've read in some report and some of the late reports that you weren't supposed to be using machinery to fetch those trees out. Would you like to make a comment on that as well?
The head wall that has been put in place is ultimately dictated the removal of those trees, and again, that is approved. I don't know the method that has been put in place, but I understand that that for that head wall, there obviously is agreed management of the wild buffer, and the means of doing that I'm not aware of at this point in time. But we are adhering to the management strategy that has been discharged by condition.
No one, Chair. Is the attenuation tank working now?
The relief tank?
Yeah.
That's being installed. And that was
provided. Is it working now? I mean, we've had 3 days of quite severe flooding. Is it actually working now? And does the whole thing drain into it and pump out like you're saying?
It's not installed at the moment, no. And that is, just to be clear, that was provided as a gesture of goodwill following discussions with local residents and the concerns that they raised. But the issue of flood risk has been well exhausted through discussion, and no objections have been raised from the LLFA in that regard, or the Environment Agency. The tank will go in. It's a condition on the Section 73 application, but it's not in at present. So
just correct me if I'm wrong. You just said it's in, but it's not working.
It's not in. It's not been installed yet. Yes.
Right.
Just
okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? No. Thank you very much.
Chair, may I just come in just very briefly on the issue that was raised by Councillor Shipman when he addressed committee. I've just checked through the emails that have been received, and many members have received these emails over the weekend and last Friday, I believe, and the emails from Mr. Allen and Mr. Eden. I've just reread them, Chair. They are referenced back to the application for residential development, not the one before you this afternoon. And they do, as members will have read and seen, they do relate, as far as I read it, entirely to issues of flooding and not to matters of content for the application before you this afternoon. So I've rechecked them, Chair, and I'm comfortable that the wording, as I say, the reference is back to the application for residential development Alan and Reedon had over the weekend in relation to potential flooding of their properties.
Thank you. Adrian, would it be possible to bring up the site plan so we can ascertain where this orchard is, whether it's still there or not there, so we can put this to bed?
Just bear with me a second, Chair. I'll just reshare my screen. The orchard, Chair, as far as I recall, it was this area further to the east of the site. And the application site, as I say, is this western edge of the site. And the orchard related to these number of these trees here, Chair, which not all, I believe, comprised the area of the former orchard. There were various trees in state of repair in that area, but this is the area referred to as the orchard, or at least a part of that.
Adrian, is there any pictures more up to date than that one?
Of the
That
site.
really shows the trees, where I've got people here that live there are telling me it's no longer there. So I just need to know for myself where these trees are or not.
Much of this area, it's difficult on an aerial photograph, Chair, to show coverage and detail of that, but the majority of these trees, yes, are no longer there. There's a rump along the eastern boundary. I don't have a site plan easily at hand of the site, but I can locate one if you'd like one. Will take me a few minutes to get that.
Okay, no problem. I'm now going to open the floor for members to put questions to the officers, but what I would like to do is this proceedings, we have to focus on getting the clarity about the points that you are not sure of. Once we've done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on all we have heard and read. And I would be grateful if you could not move any motions at this stage, and let's wait until we've had a chance to make our own assessment. Councillor Ridgway.
Yeah, I'm just wanting some information. Apparently, we're sitting here to determine about chopping down 2 trees, but we've already been told that they've been given permission to chop these trees down. So I'd like to know, did the officers know about this, and when was the permission given for it?
Chair, that issue is addressed in the report on page 27 in respect to the 2 trees in particular that need to be felled. As you can recall on the site plan, the 2 trees that needed to be removed were in relation to the outfall of the drainage area, and they fell within that area. And Mr. Abbott's confirmed that to you very recently. So, as set out in the report at page 27, Chair, officers of the view that actually those 2 trees wouldn't have required the consent of the council in any case to be felled. We've made that clear in our report to you because they were reasonably necessary to implement the approved scheme.
Thank you. Are there Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Hancock?
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, just moving on from that, once again, I've heard this afternoon that those trees that have been removed were removed mechanically, but that shouldn't have been the case. Can you enlighten us on that, please?
I'm not unfortunate at the moment, Chair, but if you just give me a few moments, I will just check in terms of the details. But as I say, may well be the point that in terms of the removal of those trees, they could have been removed anyway. But I will, if you're able, Chair, just to give me a couple of seconds to just check that permission, which I think Councillor Cooper's referring to.
Whilst we're waiting for Adrian, I think if people look at page 28 at the top, it does state, whilst included within this application, the works do not require the formal consent of the council. Yeah. No.
Chair, just as a point of order, why has it even been brought this way then? Because they're paying for an application that they've already taken decisions on and they're doing.
Because it was called in.
Excuse me, Chair, that was the reason I brought it up, because it's actually stated that we're here going to be debating about these trees being chopped down. So why is it even on the planning in here when it's already been done?
I couldn't agree more. I think we'll just wait for Adrian to come back with what he's there, but please bear that in mind.
Apologies, Chair, just got a bit of IT slowness at this end and poor fingers. But, I'm almost there now. Just having a look at the relevant decision notice, which, as I think, is what Councillor Cooper is raising. Can't see a condition, Chair, that requires only non-mechanical means to be used to undertake any works. I'd expect it to be in the ecology section. There's an issue about a condition about no vegetation clearance taking place between March and August.
I think really we can move on. I think we can all, from what I'm picking up round the table, that as the trees are already gone, we need just to move on now to the second part of the application, which is regarding the condition and the pruning of the trees. Otherwise, I think we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs and wasting a lot of time that we needn't have been here for to do. So are there any questions to Councillor Hancock?
Thank you, Chair. It's on 714. Concerns have been raised regarding the works and the impact of flooding. However, the tree works proposed pruning and officers don't consider that these works would have any significant impact on the flooding issues raised. I'm basically wanting to know under what qualification, because every bit of scientific evidence, which includes reports that the government have commissioned from Cambridge, demonstrate that pruning and crowning of trees actually has significant impact on the amount of water that they take up, certainly for a period of 2 to 3 growing seasons.
Chair, the issue as far as officers are concerned is the view of officers is that the works proposed are minimal in extent in terms of the crown lifting 2 to 3 metres and also the removal of the few limbs that are specifically addressed, Chair. And there may be a marginal impact on transpiration, for example, but the trees, other than the 2 that need to be removed, will remain on site, and the element of removal and pruning that is proposed is, in officers' opinion, limited and minimal, Chair, and won't have any significant impact on transpiration and therefore the ability of the trees to uptake water.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I'm concerned that when reading through it at the beginning, there was damage done to the trees, not the big trees, the other trees that are now going to be pruned, but there were damage done by the developers. How did that happen? Were they allowed on that bit of land at the time?
Again, Chair, works on site were the tree preservation order wasn't placed on the trees at the initial stage, Chair. I think as you heard this afternoon from Mr. Eden, he did say that some of the work was done prior to the trees being protected formally by the TPO, Chair, and I believe that is a likely scenario in this instance. Notwithstanding that, Chair, even if an element of this work was done to undertake works in relation to the site, and I think it's a moot point that the works to implement the permission would result in some works being necessitated to the trees in any case, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No, thank you. Thank you to the officers, and this leads us into the final part of the process, our discussion about what we've heard, what we think, and what we would like to decide. But before we go any further, I would like the clerk to remind us all about motions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against the officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendations falls, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or a different course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. In terms of the timing of the motions, these should be moved and seconded after the committee has heard, read, and discussed the evidence before it. The chair will indicate when this point has been reached and will then invite motions to be put. When members will be reminded of this by the clerk if they wish to propose a motion before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor for debate. Has anyone got anything to say? Councillor Hancock, Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Liggett.
I'm going to raise, and I hope it will be recorded in the minutes, my concern that every bit on this actual side seems to be coming to us retrospectively because they're just ploughing ahead and doing what they want to do and then coming and saying, oh, we've done this, can we get it approved? And that is not the way planning is supposed to operate, and I'm quite appalled. In terms of this specific application, the evidence that I've seen, which as I say is a Cambridge report commissioned for the government, even moderate amount of pruning have a disproportionate effect on a tree's ability to absorb water. So I actually can't support it, but the reality is they're going to do what they want to do anyway. So how we move is almost irrelevant. But thanks, Chair.
Councillor Elliott, no? Yeah. Councillor Liggett?
I was only a bit shocked really that the agent didn't seem to know anything about otter fencing. And I would have thought you need to know about it so you know how to put it up. That was one thing. And also, yes, we've got reports about the trees. We don't seem to have any ecology report regarding what damage could happen to the otters and the water voles. Because that's taking away some of their habitat.
I think that was covered when the original application went in, so it wouldn't be applicable to this, unfortunately. However, we have had two quite comprehensive reports, one from the tree warden at Claycross itself and one from our own warden. And unless any of us are equally or like-minded experience, I've got to go with what their report's saying and their recommendations. I'd rather see this work carried out properly and with recommendations in place that tree planting is reinstated and it is done properly with the proper trees we want.
Does the developer say who is going to crown lift these trees and so on, or do we?
I think we can look at that. That would have to be part of the condition. That's something I'd have to clarify with Adrian.
And I'm reading through it, Chair, as well, and we've nowhere to move because apparently this is all in the original application. But the only thing we can do is stipulate who does the crown lifting and to what degree, as opposed to throttling it back. I mean, I look at some of those and they are just, you know, there's things that have self-set, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. But for me, and you know how I am with trees, if you fetch one out, you put three back. And it's the trees and the roots that will support those banks. And they're fetching them out willy-nilly in my book.
Adrian, can I come back to you? Do we know who's doing the crowning work?
It would be done by the appointed agent for the developers, Chair. Just in this case, the application was made by, not by the developers themselves, but by an appointed agent, I believe. So somebody who's got experience of tree work. So it would be done by somebody with arboricultural experience and not just by the contractors.
And would we have any way to monitor that?
We would monitor as any planning consent, Chair. We would need to ensure that the approval, if granted consent, was implemented in accordance with any permission granted. In this case, Chair, the agent, the gentleman called Mr. Owen of Eco Tree Co Limited. I've no experience of them, but certainly the report that came in with the scheme did suggest that the trees had been properly surveyed, Chair. And as you say, it has been then assessed by our own colleagues and the tree warden at Claycross to give clarity to that, Chair. We couldn't say who should do it, but in this instance, it would be the application has been submitted by somebody with arbor experience, I believe, and so you would expect it would be done in an appropriate way sensitive to the trees.
Thank you. Any other comments to be made? Councillor Powell?
I think it's very unfortunate that the developer hasn't come across particularly well with lack of information. Some might say disingenuous, but maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't think we have a choice. I think we've got to approve it, but I would certainly make sure that we say that the trees have got to be pruned by a professional tree surgeon and not by a developer with an excavator, which seems to have been what's happened already. And I think we should also look at replacing some of the trees with a more suitable species, certainly to follow our own tree policy that the council has about native species. I would only vote for it if those conditions were put on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Councillor Jones?
I'm concerned about the nesting birds because we're coming to March very quickly. I'm not sure what date in March is, but it is in March that they're no longer able to cut trees that have got birds nesting. Can we make sure that that is followed and inspected to make sure that it doesn't happen after the date when it's to be stopped?
I think that can be part of the condition because I believe it's the end of March that they can't do any further work. So I'm going to ask for a motion to be put on the table. Oh, sorry, councillor Ridgway.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally agree with councillor Powell. I think it's really sad. We've got no option on this, but I do think, you know, whatever trees are chopped down, like councillor Elliott says, I don't want one tree. I want 3 trees for every one. And I think we need to be aware that if they're just chopping trees down, which they have done, that these trees are crowned and that they are not suddenly chopped down because they're getting in the way. And I think we need to really make sure that we're very vigorous with the conditions that we put on this.
Thank you. I think we're all in agreement with that. So I'm going to put a motion on the table. I mean, we really have no other course of action as to actually grant permission, but with the conditions that have been specified.
So, Chair, that was the conditions that the work should be carried out by a professional tree surgeon, that the replacement of some trees should take place, which was in line with the council's own tree policy, so native species. And then also in terms of the date of when the work can take place so that it doesn't affect nesting birds. Is that the essence of it, members?
I believe
If I may just comment very briefly, be advised by Jim if he feels this is inappropriate advice, Chair, but I don't believe it's appropriate within our gift to require a particular person or body to undertake the works. But I do think we can require, as 2 trees are being removed, I think it's reasonable to require the replacement of those 2 trees, Chair, albeit members will be aware that there is an approved landscaping scheme already in place on the site, which will involve some additional tree planting. But I do think it's appropriate to place conditions on requiring 2 replacement trees if you feel that's appropriate. And also there could be a requirement no works undertaken during the bird nesting season. But I don't think it would be within our gift to require a particular person to undertake the works, as the conditions and what is proposed are quite clearly set out in the report and the submissions, Chair.
Councillor Elliott.
Chair, Adrian's absolutely right. I just thought we may be able to specify who does it. If we can't, then I think we really do need to supervise it, or at least keep a check on what's going on there. And they have fetched the 2 trees out. I don't know whether we can stipulate they put more back. And what I don't want to see go back is a sapling. I want to see a mature tree go back. Not something that's going to take another 15 years to get to 2 foot high.
No, I think one of the conditions should definitely be a semi-mature tree, if nothing else. Certainly not saplings. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Chair. What can we actually put in, Adrian, that would protect? Because I've got concerns with what we've seen already, that it's going to be a complete botch job if we've not got some professional person undertaking it. So I think in order for me to vote in favour of this, we need something that will actually ensure that it's going to be done by a qualified person.
First of all, I reiterate, Chair, the submission is made by Mr. Owen of Eco Tree Co Limited, Chair, who are arbor specialists. Can't ask Mr. Abbott who they may appoint, but he's listening to this and I'm sure taking heed of that. Also, Chair, as far as I read the application, it's very clear indeed what works are proposed, and that's spelled out in the application details. So again, I'm happy that we can appropriately supervise as necessary the works that need to be taking place should consent be granted. And I do believe it's reasonable to require 2 replacement trees to replace those 2 that are being felled. But again, just to reiterate to members that it is only those 2 trees that are to be removed. Other than that, it is limited crown lifting and pruning and remedial works as set out in the application, Chair. I hope that answers the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Just to say, is it possible for us to take photographs of it now and proceeding, take more photographs so we can actually see what is actually happening and if it's been done in order as we want it done?
We do have photographs, Chair, of the trees as they stand at the moment. We saw those at the site yesterday. So again, I'm comfortable that we have that information and we can ensure that the works granted, should you grant consent this afternoon, are undertaken.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Liggett?
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned because mentioned before, like 1 tree out, 3 put back. But all Adrian keeps saying is replacing with 2 trees. Surely it should be 6.
If members feel, Chair, that's the only condition that they would require to grant consent, and they feel that's reasonable, that is within your gift, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's what we've agreed. If 1 comes out, 3 go back, and I definitely want semi-mature trees going back in there.
So it's to replace the 2 trees with 6 semi-mature trees in line with the council's tree policy. So in other words, of native species. And then the second thing, which I think you've still agreed to, is the restrictions in terms of when the work can take place so it doesn't impact on nesting birds.
Yes, thank you. Are we ready to proceed? The motion's on the table that we have no option but to accept this and move it forward with our recommendations.
I'll second it, Chair, providing all those conditions are met.
Thank you. I'm now going to go for roll call.
Thank you, Chair. If you could clearly state for, against or abstain. Councillor Antcliffe. For. Councillor Clough.
For.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Hancock. Councillor Hartshorn. Councillor Jones. Councillor Liggett. For. Councillor Powell. Councillor Ridgway. Councillor Rouse. And Councillor Ruff.
For.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Adrian, can I ask that as and when the work reports come in that I get a copy of them, please?
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And we can move on to the second application. I can find my notes. I know where it is. Thank you. And the next application is NED/21/01387/FL at Killarmarsh. Again, in line with our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning manager and officers to tell us about any late comments, reports which have been produced, and to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. I'll allow the officers to complete their presentation before any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There are no late representations on this application, Chair. It is an application seeking to amend previously granted consent 21/00834, which will allow for room space of one of the bungalows previously granted consent, Chair. We saw many of these slides yesterday at the site inspection meeting, but the site is at the centre of the slide. Chair, it has extant consent for 13 bungalows outlined in red, as you can see on the slide. And the site plan that was approved and consent is, as you see there, and the site plan as proposed, and the only addition is the addition of some Velux windows in some of the internal facing roof slopes. Just in terms of the detailing, Chair, this is house type C, which has consent, and you'll be able to see that the difference is, apologies, the rooms in the roof space, which is this area here. So the outline and the detail of the building and all openings other than the installation of the roof lights on the internal roof slopes, all the other details of the application remain unaltered. And then just in terms of the house type D, again, Chair, the only alteration is the provision of rooms in the roof space. Just brief, Chair, that's a reminder photograph further to the site visit yesterday of the site and the Transpennine Trail shown beyond the trees. Here, the bungalows are located in this area here. You can see that properties beyond the site to the north and across the road to the east. This area where the photograph's taken from, Chair, is a footpath leading to a bridge over the Transpennine Trail. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we have one speaker this afternoon, Daniel Baldwin, speaking by Zoom. Mr. Bull, are you there? Oh, yes, I
Yeah.
can see you.
Yeah.
3 minutes when you're ready.
Lovely. Well, as clarified by the planning officer, we've currently got permission for 13 bungalows on the site. That's 2 runs of 4 terraces, 2 blocks of semis and 1 detached. This application is simply seeking to reconfigure the 4 mid-terrace dwellings. It involves moving one of the ground floor bedrooms up onto the first floor. The existing bedroom downstairs will be turned into the staircase that it's up to the loft bedroom. So to clarify, the bedrooms already approved, they're 3-bed dwellings, and the proposed is for 3-bed dwellings. So there's no increase in number of bedrooms. I noted some increased concern regarding parking. The approved parking is staying exactly as is on the proposed. There's 2 parking spaces for each of the dwellings. So that's 26 spaces in total for the site. Just to be clear, the current volume scale, massing and size of each dwelling is staying exactly as is. We are simply accommodating a new bedroom in the already approved loft space. And external appearance is staying exactly as is, apart from, as mentioned by the case officer, the addition of some Velux windows which face into the internal roof space. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Clough?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question that residents have raised. On the original images of the properties, it's showing a roof light in every single building and a window coming out of the roof space. Is this going to be the case, or is it just going to be on the 4 properties that you want to increase?
No, we've got approval to have them windows there. Them windows are already on the approved scheme, so they're no different. Those windows are high-level windows in vaulted spaces for the properties that don't have the benefit of having a bedroom upstairs. So them windows are there on every property and were there on every property on the approved scheme that we've already got.
So will there be a Velux window in each property as well?
As shown on the site plan, you can see that every property already has 2 Velux windows in, and that's over a vaulted living space. The 4 properties in question on this application will have the additional Velux windows for light to the bedroom that is being moved upstairs.
So is there likely to be a future plan to increase further 1.5 in the other bungalows?
Absolutely no.
Are there any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Ball. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point of clarity, just for my own peace of mind. The way I'm looking at these plans, there's actually no increased overlooking as a result at all. It's simply an overlooking somebody else's roof, isn't it? That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Ball.
Thank you.
Now we reach the point where are there any questions for the planning officers? No? Oh, good. Okay, got light off there, lit off lightly there, Adrian. Okay, we'll move on then I'll open the floor for debate if there's any. No, I think we'll just then move straight on to a motion. Thank you. Right, okay, thank you very much. Roll call then.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Antcliffe. For. Councillor Clough.
For.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Hancock. Councillor Hartshorn.
For.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Liggett. For. Councillor Powell. Councillor Ridgway. Councillor Rouse. And Councillor Clough.
For.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And we can move on then to the planning and appeals lodged and determined. They've been moved by Councillor Elliott, the seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Everyone else in favour? Thank you very much. I have no matters of urgency, but now we move on to item 9, exclusion of the public. That the public be excluded from the meeting during this discussion following the item of business to avoid disclosure of them of exempt information. Don't think anyone's left, are they? Oh, sorry, I have to read the rest. Okay. Okay, well, I'm trying to do my bit. Defined in paragraph 3, part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access of Information Variation Order 2008. Do we all agree to take that? Yep, everyone happy? Thank you very much.